Hi, I'm Steve Evans, and I'm here with Sonicstate to talk about RME, the world of RME. We were thinking that the way things are at the moment, with people starting to work remotely more than ever, people starting to work portably more than ever, you know, with the current pandemic, and even over the course of the last couple of years anyway, really complicated post-production workflows, different formats, immersive formats like Dolby Atmos and surround sound have actually started coming into the reach of mere mortals like you and me. And we can actually achieve a lot of this stuff in very, very small setups in challenging places and sometimes portably as well. And what I've found doing that very thing is that I've found myself using a collection of different interfaces and equipment from different manufacturers. And invariably, each different manufacturer has their own piece of software to talk to the equipment. And the equipment all needs to be configured to speak to each other. We've got different types of clocking, we've got different types of audio protocol, you know, we've got good old analog, but we've got things like Dante and MIDI, we've got various different digital things like SPDIF, ADAT, AES, and the list goes on of possible ways that you can kind of get crossed wires. So what was attractive about looking at RME is that it seems on the face of it, they offer a really good range of tools, something for almost every job you can think of. But in that, they are all unified by one user interface to rule them all. And if you've mastered TotalMix, then you can use that with any RME interface in the range. There's a learning curve that happens once, and that's it. This seemed to me quite attractive. And of course, behind all that, you want to make sure that your audio quality, your A to D and your D to A is of pristine quality. We don't want to be losing stuff, especially if we're going in and out on hardware inserts and all this kind of stuff. So we're interested in clocking, we're interested in A to D and D to A conversion quality, we're interested in intercommunication, connection, and general ergonomics. So we're going to look at two interfaces today. One is the BabyFace Pro FS, which is a very small portable interface. And the other is the UFX Plus, which is a rack-mounted unit, but basically a Swiss Army knife that covers pretty much any eventuality. So let's dive in. So in the world of RME, there are four things that are common to all the interfaces and equipment that they make. Probably the most important one is the TotalMix effects software. Look at this. Look at all that.
So that is mighty scary.
That looks it's a bit hairy, scary, isn't it? But actually, you know, when you like all these things, if you just dive in, it's not so bad. This is referring to the UFX Plus. This is referring to the BabyFace Pro FS. I'll probably just call it the UFX and the BabyFace going forward because I keep forgetting to add all the little bits on the end, all right? So this represents all the inputs. This represents the outputs from your DAW. This represents all the outputs on the unit. And basically, what we're doing is patching the signal path through the unit, and we are making submixes and things like that. We'll probably come back to that in more detail. The other thing is TotalMix Remote, which is that, but on an iPad. Okay, so that makes a lot of things possible as well, and again, usable with the whole range, or pretty much all the range. DigiCheck is a piece of software that can be used, very high precision analysis software with several different tools on it that can be used to kind of check what's going on, compatible across the RME range. And then last but not least, the ARC USB remote, which can talk to multiple units at the same time and is highly configurable, talkback, alt speaker, dim, everything you'd need. So that works across many of the interfaces, and that's what's so appealing about the RME range, is the fact that you know, you can aggregate these devices as you want, but you're still going to be able to talk to them quite easily. You're going to know how to patch out of one and patch into the other because the workflow is the same. So there's a lot going for that in terms of kind of just getting on with it. I think the other thing I should say is that RME haven't particularly been on my radar much. I tend to I've been using Pro Tools for a long time, and I've been lucky enough to have a pair of Prism converters, which have been my kind of day-to-day workhorse in the studio for many years. When I've gone out and about on the road up till now, I've tended to use Motu interfaces for no other reason really than that they were the first ones I kind of came across that were kind of USB bus powered, works with a laptop. I used to have them in little kind of suitcase things, so I had a mobile rig or for doing live work. But I have always noticed RME hardware in people's studios, and everything I've noticed as well is that people tend to be quite loyal. I've seen different RME interfaces of kind of growing across the years in different people's studios, and looking at the whole situation and talking to them, there's a good reason for that really, and I think it's because RME have always, whilst not been particularly flag wavy, and here we are about things, they've just got on with the idea of making high quality interfaces. They've always written their own drivers, which means that actually the RME interfaces have quite often performed a lot better than some other interfaces in terms of round-trip latency and things like that have relied on kind of class-compliant in-the-box solutions. And whilst they continue to kind of innovate, quite often ahead of the general curve, they also seem to look after people who are running old equipment still, and there seems to be a lot of support there. So I've kind of discovered a kind of quite loyal and quite kind of quietly fanatical RME community while I've been researching, this piece. So there seems to be a lot going for them. So I think what we need to do is have a look at these two interfaces, in detail, and just get a feel for the workflow.
And I guess we should say that they're in the rack, hidden away right now.
Yeah, they're not in front of me, so I haven't got them here to show you all the knobs. I can't show you all the sockets in the back. They're in my machine room round the corner, and they're plugged up with optical cables and USB, and I've got the remote here, but that's talking to both of the interfaces. So we'll have a look at those separately, but they're around the corner, they're not in front of me. And of course, everything I need to do, I can do from on the screen here. By default, the software will show everything that's available on that unit. Now, you don't have to look at that, of course. You can...
I guess you can do custom views.
You can. Well, like, for example, there's a layout here that I made where I don't need to be looking at all the MIDI interfaces. Right. So, that's with everything. Actually, I can close that down, and I can just bring my window in a little bit there as well. If I don't need to look at my doors, I can switch to just a 2-row option, and my poor old eyesight, sadly being what it is, you can actually hoik it up to old person's setting, so you can see what you're doing there. Yeah. But actually, I've been having it on the default 100%, just so I've made sure that I can see absolutely everything that's going on, just so when I've been firing test signals around the place, I'm just making sure I'm not missing everything and getting used to it. So let's start with the UFX Plus, shall we? That's the kind of Swiss Army knife, I guess, of the range. So RME would say it's a 188 channel interface. Okay, so I guess what they mean is 94 in, 94 out. That's 12 analog ins and outs, 16 ADAT in and outs on 2 ports, so ADAT 1 and ADAT 2, 1 to 8 each, 2 AAS stereo digital channels, and 64 channels of MIDI. Actually, no, sorry, 2 AAS, that's one stereo AAS stream, and 64 channels of MIDI. So you've got MIDI, which has been around for a while, always been a favourite of Pro Tools. AVB is another format, lesser known. I haven't come across it as much, don't know very much about it. Dante is something I'm learning a lot more about. That's cropped up a lot more on the live scenario, so people connecting digital monitor consoles and throwing signal to the front of house console. That tends to happen on Dante. They have decided to go for MIDI for this interface. I have another unit, I have a Focusrite 16 line. They've gone for 32 channels of Dante. So apart from the MIDI Dante thing, you can walk into pretty much any situation and you've got your opticals, your SPDIFs and your analogs, and you're pretty much going to be able to talk to anything. And I think that's the point. Now, the other thing about the sheer size of this thing, with all those inputs, there's another very important piece of functionality with the UFX Plus, and that is the ability to do multi-track recording on it. If you stick a USB thumb drive or bigger into the front, then you can actually record, I think, probably 76 channels at once of live multi-track audio and then play it back. Okay, so that's a really good way of recording a live show.
And that's totally standalone, no computers needed.
Totally standalone, no computers needed, right? So it's either good for a main option for recording a show. It's also great for a redundancy option. So if you kind of, a backup recording system, because especially if you are using MIDI or Dante, you can parallel it up very easily. So you can send it to several different machines and they can all record it together. And that's a big feature of this. Great for not only doing recordings, but the fact you can play it back. For sound engineers, it means you can do that lovely thing where you have a virtual sound check. So you can kind of play back the recordings or the inputs from the previous night's show and actually play them back through your system. They would appear as they were, and you can actually, start getting your mix together very quickly before the band turn up. Things like that. The other thing is, as well, is what you can do with this is that for every one of these outputs, so for all of the 16 analogs, the AAS, the ADATs, the MADIs, each one of these outputs, okay, has its own submix. So what I mean by that is, if you've got a bunch of stuff coming in here, okay, you can send different mixes of all of that stuff to all of these different outputs, okay? What's that? 16, I can't even count them, 20 different stereo submixes going out. I mean, I can't imagine, God forbid anyone who needs to do that, but that's what's possible. So it can, be a little daunting to start off with, but all you've got to remember is things come in here, things go out there, and you can decide what goes out of what output. That also brings me on to another really good use of this interface that I can think of as well. Having been part of a theatre show recently, I've had to set up live rehearsals, and there's been quite a big band, 8 or 9 people in the band, plus people backstage who need to hear what's going on. They're used to working with in-ear monitors and a big monitor console, and of course we haven't got that when we're just doing general rehearsals and working things out. So with earbuds and hardwired sends from analog outputs, or from or sending MADI or Dante out to little Mackie consoles and things like that, it's possible to send all the different performers their own mix in their own earbuds or headphones or monitors or speakers or whatever. But on top of that, what is really great is, because of this remote control possibility with the iPad, what you can do is you can give each performer an iPad. Each iPad will talk to the interface, and you can decide what level of control each iPad has. So practically what that means is that each person has got an iPad and they can do their own headphone mix. They can have their iPad on a little stand and they can decide how much drums they want, how much of themselves, how much everything else. You don't have to worry about it. So that makes it a brilliant tool for live rehearsal situations. I mean, in some ways, it's kind of right up there with some of the kind of most complex live mixing consoles,
Can that happen on any iOS device? It work on a phone?
Doesn't work on a phone at the moment, which would be brilliant if it does. The Mackie version of this, I've got a DL32R out there, and their iOS-based remote control system does work on a phone. So that's really good, because people don't always have an iPad with them, but most of them have got a phone, and it's quite easy just to kind of download the app, type in your IP address, and away you go. And I can give them a little kind of 8-fader thing, and that's them, and they're happy. I can forget about them.
That would be useful.
It would be really useful, but iPads are fairly ubiquitous now as well. So that's one really good area where this can excel, where the UFX Plus can excel. One of the other things that wasn't immediately obvious to me, but I was really interested in is I'm thinking a lot about immersive audio formats. I work a lot in 5.1, and I'm now thinking that I want to get into the world of Atmos. And if I'm going to do Atmos to the level I want, that's a kind of that means 12 loudspeakers, right? That means 12 outputs of some description, probably analog for me. So getting a machine where you can control simultaneously 12 outputs is problematical, but you can do that with this. I mean, what I've shown you here is if you look on the, I've made a fader group here, 4 fader groups available, and I've made a red group here. So that is red, and I've included these over here. So if I move this fader down here, you'll see that the faders are grouped. I've effectively ganged all those outputs. That gives me multi-channel volume, okay, which is brilliant. Not only that, just a little aside here, I've also got the BabyFace on the system as well, which is down here, and I've ganged the main output and these other outputs on the BabyFace as well.
Oh, that's clever.
Well, with the ARC, I can have it so that the main volume addresses both those units, and actually that gives me 12. Okay, so that is enough to control the Dolby Atmos monitoring rig, which is brilliant. So we've got an idea of the complexity, stroke simplicity, and the possibilities, you know, technically with the UFX Plus. Most importantly, what does it sound like? And I'm happy to say it sounds really good. I went through my general listening playlist of testing stuff out, and it was absolutely a joy. I think the trying to describe the sound of something in words is always a bit tricky, but I think kind of accurate and precise and full is probably the best I can do. Also, what we decided to do was set up a little shootout between the Prism and the Prism ADA8, which is one of the most expensive converters on planet Earth, and the UFX Plus, and also the BabyFace Plus too. And we decided to have a little bit of a shootout between them. So having carefully routed everything out of Pro Tools to the 3 different interfaces, I used my SPL meter to make sure, running tones, that we were on the same level field exactly, playing field with volume. And we sat down and did a little ABC to hear, you know, the enormous differences between these these interfaces. And I think the best thing to do is just play you some audio at this point. And I'm gonna flick over here between the Prism, the BabyFace Pro FS, and the UFX Plus, just to show you where we are.
And all the ways are wasted living, all the ways are wasted winning, all the ways are wasted living love. All the ways are wasted living, all the ways are, and all the ways are wasted.
Let's listen to something else. Let's have a listen to this. Prism. BabyFace. UFX Plus. A bit of this. Point is, they all sound really, really good. And Andy and I really couldn't hear much of a difference between the two.
Yeah,
3.
I have to confirm. It was really, really... if my life depended on it, I couldn't tell you which one was which.
I really wanted my Prisms to sound markedly better than anything else to warrant the hideous amount of money that I've spent on them. But truth be told, I was really impressed. And these interfaces sound very good indeed. We should probably talk a little bit about clocking now, the enthralling subject of digital clocking, right? The BabyFace Pro FS, femtosecond, nanosecond,
picosecond,
femtosecond. The reason that that FS is there is because the BabyFace Pro, diminutive as it is, and with less inputs, I think I think it's 12. I think you've got kind of 4 analog, 8 ADAT. A really good little interface, 2 headphones, mini, main, switchable output levels on the back. It sounds, if anything, if there is, when we were really, really kind of listening and listening to pink noise and different frequencies with the signal generator and all that, we think that the BabyFace, has maybe got an edge on the UFX Plus in terms of what we were listening to today, in terms of just one single stage of D2A. Now, I don't know how that would stack up with multiple ins and outs, hardware inserts. That's where these interfaces really shine. The good ones will stand up to that. The other ones, not so much. So we thought the BabyFace sounded brilliant. And one of the reasons maybe for that is this kind of slightly superior internal clocking system that's going on there, which basically reduces jitter. Jitter is the kind of amount of errors and instability that can happen with digital clocking. Digital clocking is there to tell everything when the sample starts and when the sample finishes. And your master clock just works through your whole system and tells everybody the sample starts now, the sample ends now. Right? That's what's happening. So in a stable clocking situation, all is good. The better your clocking, which is what I've loved about the Prisms all this time, the better the clocking, the more stable your sound stage that is, the more 3D it is, the bigger it appears to be, the more kind of engaging it is. When you're using systems that don't clock as well, the sound stage seems to be a bit smaller. Maybe the world is a little bit duller. It's kind of not quite as immediately engaging, as exciting. This is all golden ears stuff, really. I mean, there's not a lot in it. You can tell when you're doing A/B with beautiful monitors in a critical listening environment, then these things become a lot more obvious. All of these interfaces are rocking, to be honest with you. But the BabyFace does have this improved clocking system, and I think is it the ADI 2?
Yeah.
That's their that's RME's flagship A to D and D2A converter that also employs the same technology. And not only does it have a really stable internal clock, if you do have to clock it from something else, so in my system, with the UFX Plus, for example, I'm clocking that word clock, so it fits in with the rest of my system, and then I'm feeding the BabyFace with optical, so I'm clocking that through optical. Even if it's getting a second-hand clock through optical, actually that technology will help suppress the jitter and stabilize the jitter even from a slightly inferior clock. So that's maybe one of the reasons why it sounds quite so sparkly. Interestingly, on the BabyFace, your line and mic inputs are all on just XLR. They're not combi sockets. There's not a jack option. So there's a lot of headroom built into the mic amp to enable it to take very loud sources. There's not a pad on there. You've just got a very wide-ranging amp. That works very well. It does also mean you can send phantom power to your line level equipment. So, that is something to watch. As always, watch out for your phantom power. That's always an issue when you're using phantom power enabled from software. You have to stay on top of that stuff, ribbon mics and all that kind of thing.
I think it's DC coupled too, isn't it? So you can use it with your Eurorack.
It's DC coupled. So yes, if you want to kind of get into your CV controlling of your Eurorack or your old analog synths, you can do that from the BabyFace as well. That was really generous of them to include that, because that's kind of niche, right? And they've also put MIDI sockets on there as well, because these days most stuff is USB, but it is great that you've got the MIDI option there as well to connect your old synths. And again, that the BabyFace Pro is a really great little kind of Swiss Army knife to have in your back pocket with pristine audio quality too. I think we should probably just talk about latency. Round trip latency at 44.1 or 48 is in the region of 3.5 to 4 milliseconds. And just in case you're thinking, I can't work with that kind of latency, that's the kind of latency that's between me and my loudspeakers at the moment. It starts there and it comes here, and it takes about kind of 3 milliseconds to do that. So it's kind of negligible. And I think because of the fact that RME write their own drivers, I think you're going to be hard pressed to find any interface that gets better round trip latency than that. I will no doubt maybe be proved wrong, but I think we're up there for sure.
Does that change depending on how you've got the UFX, for example, connected? Because there's lots of ways of connecting that, isn't there?
There are lots of ways of connecting it, yeah. And what we should talk about, I guess, with the UFX Plus is that it connects with USB 2. And actually, it will do a lot of damage with USB 2. But you are limited on track count when it comes to recording with USB 2. So you can't record all your MIDI interfaces when you're using USB 2 because the bandwidth isn't there to do that. If you use USB 3, you can. Your latency doesn't get any better, it's still the same. And there is a Thunderbolt 2 connector on the back as well. Again, your latency isn't really going to be any better than the 3.5 milliseconds ballpark that we're talking about. But with the higher bandwidth connections, you will get the full channel count. Apart from if you want to work up at 192, for example, should you wish to do that, I still haven't found the need myself, but I know people do. In that case, you are cut down, I think. I think if you're working at 192, you've got 16 channels of MIDI, and your 2 optical ports become 2 and 2. So, you know, if you want to work right up there, then there's going to be limitations there. But other than that, USB 2 delivers. And the connectivity with the BabyFace is the same. And it's USB 1, I think, with the remote control. So you do have to watch out for cable lengths. Too long on your USB and you'll have jittery connections. But what's quite nice about the remote control here, which is an optional extra, by the way, is that these 3 buttons here, when they're lit dim like that, they kind of have diagnostics. One of them shows that there's a voltage, the voltage is good. Another one shows the USB connection is good. And the other one shows something else. Basically, you want to see 3 of those to know you're good. So it's a nice little diagnostic tool.
So obviously with your setup, you've got them in the rack. The remote control is almost essential. But if someone was to have them on desktop, is it still offer functions that you can't get otherwise?
Well, you're going to be doing a lot of, if you didn't have the remote control, there's not really a huge amount you can do on the front of those. I mean, with the BabyFace, you've got your rotary encoder. So with the BabyFace, you've got a ready-made remote control anyway. The rotary encoder, by default, does the main volume, as you'd expect, but with the select buttons on the front, you can make it do your mic and line inputs, phantom power on and off. Actually, there's, with the using the TotalMix software, actually you can configure that unit to do various different things. So you can use the rotary controller for your main volume, or you can switch it to control somebody else's headphone volumes, 1 or 2, or ADAT outputs. So there's a lot of configurability. With the UFX Plus, for example, I mean, it's a rack. You know, you've got your sockets in the front. That's about it. You're going to talk to it with the software.
Right, so it's more appropriate to get the remote control if you're dealing with the larger rack.
Yeah, I think with the UFX Plus, the remote control is pretty essential, I think. And also, it's not something that, I mean, if you think about it, it's got 4 mic amps on the front. You know, you're going to need probably to be working in conjunction with other interfaces and converters. You're probably going to want to be working with a MIDI I/O that converts your MIDI signals to analog. Same with optical. So the UFX will quite often work alongside other stuff as well.
Cool. Going back to the BabyFace, it's bus powered, yeah?
Yes, it is bus powered. Yeah, I mean there is a power supply socket on there. Really nice little locking 9-volt DC power supply socket. These interfaces will connect to your iPad as well.
Okay, got you.
So if you're using a tablet and you're using the camera kit, for example, then you're going to need power from somewhere. So in that case, it comes from the DC power supply. So there's a good reason for that. Well, let's sum it up. The interfaces sound great. First and foremost, most importantly, they sound great. I would love to use them in any of the mission-critical applications I find myself professionally. Mastering, recording, analysis, live work, giving people headphone mixes, whatever. They will do the job and they sound really, really good. What we haven't looked at is the DigiCheck application that also is part of the world of RME, which is a great way of checking what's coming in and what's coming out. Very detailed, very thorough, very accurate. That's great. The TotalMix software is great, talks to any of the interfaces. I love the fact that the remote talks to all the interfaces, multiple interfaces in one go. I love the fact that it's really programmable. I can make it my own. I love the iOS situation as well, working over Wi-Fi, walking around the room, changing things giving people their own device to do their own headphones, all the different formats. It's a great world. I'm glad I've had a chance to kind of familiarize myself with it, and I understand now why people are so enthusiastic and loyal to RME. These are really solid products, but most of all, they sound great.
And I guess we should point out that we're not being paid for this.
No, we're not being paid for it. We don't get to keep them. No, they've got to go back. But you know, we've put them up alongside the best, and they really hold their own. You know, we couldn't tell, could we?
No, I have to say, I was hoping that there would be a difference, and it was, I just couldn't discern it.
Well, if there was, it would be better for us because we can go, look, we've discovered it. But no, these interfaces sound absolutely great.